Welcome to a Legendarium special about the Raft of the Medusa, a nightmare sea voyage. In this episode, we will talk about how the incompetence and cowardice of one man led to the deaths of more than 130 people. On July 5th, 1816, four ships called the Echo, La Loire, Argus, and Medusa carried French officials to assume control of Senegal from the British. Passengers of the flagship Medusa included the French governor Julien Désiré Schmaltz and the ship's captain, Viscount Hugh du Roy de Chaumareys. The Medusa's problems began with Captain Chaumareys. An aristocrat who had not been to sea in 20 years, Chaumareys received command because of his friendship to the newly restored monarch, King Louis XVIII. Against protests made by his own officers, Chaumareys handed over navigation to a philanthropist named Richefort. This man, with no experience guiding ships, bluffed his way into the position while Chaumareys remained below deck with his mistress. Captain Chaumareys, in a hurry to reach his destination, opted for the most direct route along the coastline. Once more, he ignored the warnings of veteran sailors about sandbars. The other three ships wisely moved away from the shore and lost contact with the Medusa. Chaumareys and Rochefort ignored many signs that the water around them grew too shallow. Most egregiously, Rochefort thought a bank of clouds on the horizon to be Cape Blanco. Based on that mistake, he did not have an accurate idea of their location. Unsurprisingly, the Medusa ran aground about 30 miles off the coast. Even after running aground, the ship could have been saved if Captain Chaumareys agreed to jettison the ship's heavy cannons, thus lightening the load, but he refused to do so. The governor also refused to throw over heavy barrels of flour. As the Medusa started to break up, the governor devised a plan to build a raft that would hold 200 passengers and provisions. Under the threat of their ship sinking, the passengers hurriedly began to build. However, they did not have enough time to build something stable or spacious. The passengers proved hesitant to board the raft until an infantry officer threatened to shoot anyone who refused to board the dodgy vessel. After 40 crew members boarded, the raft began sinking, and the passengers threw their provisions overboard to make room for 107 more people who could not fit aboard the lifeboats. During the chaos, the governor, comfortably seated in his armchair, was carried to one of the lifeboats, along with his family and several large chests. The plan originally called for the lifeboats to tow the raft. However, the officers on those boats believed their chances of survival would be better if they did not have to tug the raft and its desperate survivors. They cut the ropes that bound their lifeboats to the raft, leaving their fellow passengers to a horrible fate. When the people on the raft realized what the lifeboat captains did, they began to cry, "Vive le Roi!" or "Long live the King!" to appeal to their fellow Frenchmen's sense of duty. They made their cries in vain. The lifeboats sailed off with both the captain and the governor aboard, along with a vast cache of luxury goods. Although the boats remained well below capacity when some on the raft tried to board the lifeboats, the officers drove them off with swords. In the rush to load as many people onto the raft as possible, crew members threw their water overboard, leaving those on the raft with nothing but casks of wine to drink. Raft survivors had no food but a sack of biscuits, which an officer flung towards the raft as the vessel separated. The bag missed the raft and fell into the ocean. This turned the biscuits into paste, which proved remarkably well preserved. With only a few soggy biscuits and wine, the passengers grew hopeless as they baked under the furnace-like West African sun. The governor's secretary, deemed less important to the governor than his beloved armchair, was not invited to join his boss in the lifeboat. Relegated to the sinking raft, the secretary threw himself off the raft not once, but twice. Both times his fellow passengers hauled him back onto the raft. The next day, 3 more people committed suicide, quietly jumping off the raft and allowing ocean currents to take them away. As the waves tossed them about, the passengers fought their way to the center of the raft. Dozens died fighting to get into the center or fell overboard by accident. After the soggy biscuits ran out, many of the passengers resorted to eating the leather of their pouches, belts, and hats. Luckily, a group of tiny fish, slightly smaller than herring, became trapped between the side timbers of the raft. The castaways lunged at the fish and stored 200 of them in an empty cask. However, the fish did not prove enough, and the passengers began making a thick stew out of the flesh of their fallen comrades and the small herring-like fish. By the 8th day, only 27 of the 147 passengers still lived, and half of them suffered from severe injuries or hallucinations. To make their remaining provisions last longer, the stronger survivors threw their weaker raft mates overboard. This left the murderers with enough wine to last them for 6 days. They reached the last of their dregs when the Argus, one of the ships that joined the Medusa on its voyage, found the remaining 15 survivors. They found them almost naked, hollow-eyed, barely able to move, and having grown long and scraggly beards. Sailors on the Argus gave the survivors bread and wine before taking them to the city of St. Louis in Senegal. Captain Chaumareys did return to the site of his wrecked ship, not to see if any of his crew or passengers had survived, but to retrieve a cache of gold on board. When he returned home, Chaumareys' ineptitude caused a court-martial which found him guilty of poor navigation and abandoning his ship before all the passengers made it safely off. While he should have gotten the death penalty, Chaumareys only served 3 years in jail for actions that led to the death of more than 130 people. When word came back to France, the specter of the rich allowing the poor to die soured the people on the restored monarchy. The tragedy became so infamous that it inspired the Raft of the Medusa, a well-known painting by Romantic artist Theodore Géricault. The painting is a 24-foot-long masterpiece housed in the Louvre, around the corner from the Mona Lisa. This seminal work of 19th-century art inspired the likes of Monet and Delacroix, though the events leading up to the scene are no longer as infamous. Though wherever people cherish their fellow men or hate treachery, the Raft of the Medusa should be remembered. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe, and if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.